July 2007, and one of the wettest Julys on record, Amanda Chadburn would receive a phone call.
Hello?
Oh, hi.
David?
Amanda, yes. Silbury Hill has collapsed.
Oddly, this wasn't the first phone call uttering those exact words. Amanda and the team have been working on the conservation of the mound, securing its integrity and safety after centuries of shafts and tunnels it had been dug.
By drilling from the top and points on the side.
This collapse could be a major setback for that project. As it turned out though, this collapse gave English Heritage the opportunity to understand Silbury Hill more than anyone had done in the last half millennia. Silbury Hill is an artificial chalk mound, mainly chalk some clay. In fact, it's completely man-made. Now, by and large, the mound was built using chalk from the immediate vicinity. It's sat here for millennia, confusing the random passer-by, the antiquarian of old, and perhaps even the more modern scientific and academic world. That was until just a few years ago. 1663, and John Aubrey draws the first known image of this monument. He writes about Silbury and the surrounding monuments, publishing Monumenta Britannica. He mused at the notion that this could be very old, pre-Saxon, pre-Roman, pre-history. 1740, and in steps William Stukeley, and he publishes his work on Silbury and the entire Avebury landscape, and he does a very iconic, famous picture with Avebury stone circle sat top in the middle and an avenue either side, Beckhampton to the west and West Kennet Avenue to the east. And lo and behold, centre stage at the bottom is of course Silbury Hill. William Stukeley saw this as a viewing platform, a centrepiece for this landscape. Back to the collapse, but not that collapse. You see, there was another 7 years prior, May the 29th, 2000, the first collapse, and Amanda Chadburn receives the first phone call.
Hello?
Amanda, Silbury Hill has collapsed.
It appears that a large hole has appeared in the top of Silbury Hill. Now, knowing the approximate age of this place to you and I, that sounds quite odd, but to Amanda it didn't, because she knew the history of this place in great detail. The largest artificial mound in the Northern Hemisphere. Amanda and her team needed a plan. They needed a task which would ensure the long-term security and integrity of this monument. It wouldn't be an easy task, but perhaps for the first time in 200 or 300 years, it would be about conservation, not archaeology. So how exactly was there a collapse? The monument we knew had been there for a few thousand years at least. And more importantly, how was it that the collapse was just a hole in the top that sunk down? To answer that, we need to go back some time. In fact, 1776, the Duke of Northumberland employed a team of miners to open up a shaft on the mound. Now, the nature of his reputation really preceded the good Duke. In fact, some would refer to him as a treasure hunter rather than an early archaeologist. Nonetheless, he sunk a shaft right down a very long way, expecting to find all kinds of untold treasures, and he found absolutely nothing other than chalk. Now, you have to wait for another 75 years before another excavation took place. The Archaeological Institute, newly formed, tasked a man called Merewether to tunnel once again, but this time in from the side, once again expecting to find all kinds of artefacts and things that they could use to perhaps date this. But once again he found absolutely nothing. A century would now pass until a very keen BBC Two director by the name of David Attenborough would ask Richard Atkinson to conduct a further dig. Now Atkinson would tunnel once again and would try and unearth Silbury Hill's mystery. He did use new techniques and new understandings, and he did report something that the previous tunnellers had not. Now, Atkinson was probably the first to suggest, as far as I can tell, that Silbury was built in 3 different stages. First of all, the original turf mound, followed by another chalk mound, followed by a chalk mound on top of that. Now, as far as I can tell, again, the funding was cut for Atkinson, and he suggested that they should leave his tunnel open for future generations. Kind of made sense, but also English Heritage, or the Ministry of Works at the time, said that was probably unsafe, so they should look at backfilling at least part of it. So was Stukely right? Was this a platform on the landscape? It is such a curious place for this to be positioned. We aren't high up at all. In fact, we're in a valley. The valley that this mound sits in allows it to rise up to the height of the surrounding hills. It's like the centrepiece of a bowl or a dish, with the centre meeting up to the surrounding edges. And if we travel across to West Kennet Longbarrow on the horizon, well, something even more curious greets us. Top of this hill we have West Kennet Longbarrow, and that gives us an entirely different view of Silbury Hill, but not the physical view. You see, West Kennet Longbarrow, in its first inception, its first form, was built just over 1,200 years before Silbury Mound. So why is that date so important? How does it relate to Silbury Hill? Well, the first burial here, as we said, 1,200 years before Silbury Hill, but then it was continued to be used. The graves were infilled, reused, and perhaps for the next 1,000 years or so it was used as maybe a ceremonial place. One theory by Mike Parker Pearson is that because of the timing of the final closure of West Kennet Longbarrow, with these huge sarsens around 1,000 years after its first use, well, they came at almost the same time as the first stages of Silbury Hill. Mike goes on to suggest that the change in society, the change in people, burial practices, the incoming of this new technology brought about by the Bronze Age, or maybe, just maybe, that this was the last stand for the Neolithic people. Back to the collapse. Amanda and her team have been working hard planning the conservation work for years now. The involvement of the company Skanska is vital for their work and supporting Amanda and the team. They find the 1968 lintel, and when they start digging in early 2007, so they'd found that a number of voids had started to open up above that tunnel, so they started to shore that up and brace it a bit further. They also found some more antlers, and again this time now they could radiocarbon date these with a lot more accuracy by specialist Alex Bayliss. So why was this July 2007 collapse so important? Well, it actually created a void closer to the centre of Silbury Hill. A tip atop stage 2 or phase 2 of Silbury Hill was now exposed with organic matter. Jill Campbell analysed grass stems from this tip of Salisbury 2 and found a specific species of grass that takes 10 to 15 years to establish. This means it was now possibly growing on the hill at that point after phase 2. Snail shells also present implies that this was left for some period of time. They were also able to reaffirm the start date, 2400 BC, based on the original turf or grass layer before any of this took place, any construction here, the turf mound. 2400 BC, give or take 1 or 2 generations. How specific is that? Based on the numerous new results, the almost per chance opportunity to date the different Silbury Hills that formed its overall one construction, we have a new set of data to help. nothing really other than construction tools and material were found within it to give us an indication of the purpose of its build. We do now have that 2400 BC start date, which is the main thing that can help give us the context of this monument within the surrounding landscape. Maybe, just maybe, as short as 100 years, or maybe even one person's lifetime would have seen the entirety of this built. However, that could be as much as 300 or 400 years. So phase 1 was built within a generation of the 2400 BC date. Phase 2 was built, and then phase 3, and we now know as well there was at least a 10 or 15 year period at least between phase 2 and phase 3 because of that organic matter that was found. Jim Leary suggests that because of this gap, this potential minimum 10 to 15 years between phase 2 and 3, Silbury was constructed over a long period of time, perhaps centuries. Based on this standstill period, it indicates that it was not a continuous progress. And perhaps, as Mike Parker Pearson suggests, that this was a last stand by the Neolithic in the face of new technologies emerging around them. We may never truly understand the purpose of Silbury Hill when it was built, but the story of the collapses, the story of the 17th century antiquarians through to the more modern archaeologists, and of course Amanda Chadburn and her team, help us give a much better sense of the place of this monument in the landscape today, and potentially what it was for. Perhaps those that built it did see a huge change in the way of life, new technologies evolving, and this was their last stand. Now, if you like the prehistory type videos we do, you can go and watch this one just here. AC Smith mapped all of this area on horseback, and he found many secrets that we wouldn't have known about if it wasn't for him.